There is a truth that agricultural supply centers never want gardeners like us to realize. Every year you are trapped in a vicious cycle, spending money and draining your energy on vegetables that you really only need to plant once in your lifetime. Today, we are going to plant these 8 forgotten perennial vegetables once, then harvest for years. This method has saved my back and liberated my garden from those exhausting, expensive spring shopping bills. However, there is one particular vegetable on this list, and if you don't understand its bizarre false dormancy mechanism, there is a high chance you will rip it out and throw it away in its very first year. Last spring, I stood at the checkout counter of a nursery, looking at the long receipt for all kinds of plastic seed trays, plastic mulch, pre-mixed soil bags, and F1 hybrid seed packets costing nearly $200. I suddenly realized I was losing my freedom. My garden was unable to fight inflation. It was not inflation-proof at all. You see, growing short-term or annual vegetables is like having to rebuild a house from the foundation up every single spring. To make room to sow seeds, you have to till and turn over the topsoil. That action, however unintentional, completely severs the millions of fragile mycorrhizal fungi threads trying to establish a nutrient transfer network underground. The soil is left bare, losing carbon. Weed seeds are given the chance to germinate, and you start a brand new cleaning war all over again. And the highest price to pay isn't just in your wallet. It's in the dull lower back pain after hours of bending over to hoe the row. It's in the stiffness of your knees when you constantly have to kneel down to pull weeds. Gardening at our age can no longer be such a meaningless drain on our physical strength. Every method I apply now must be joint-friendly, turning weekends into a quiet, effortless enjoyment. That is why I return to the wisdom of nature and the generations before us. They relied on perennial vegetables. These magnificent plants possess an innate resilience. You put them in the ground once. They send their roots deep down into the aquifer to sustain themselves through droughts. They create their own fertilizer using their fallen leaves in autumn. They establish a self-sustaining ecosystem year after year. No tilling, no replanting, no aching knees or sore backs. Now, let's step over to that quiet corner of the garden, brush away the dry leaf mulch, and see how the first messengers of spring are quietly waking up. Do you remember my warning at the beginning of the video about a mistake that causes many people to rip up their precious vegetable patch in its very first year? Now, as we stand before this bed of French sorrel and this 15-year-old asparagus patch, I will tell you about a visual illusion created by nature. When the first frosts of November arrive, all the lush green foliage above ground on the asparagus and sorrel will wilt, turn yellow, and collapse into the mud. They look exactly like dead, dried-up plants. Inexperienced gardeners or those accustomed to the rhythm of annual vegetables will rush out with a hoe to dig them up and remove them by the roots, thinking the season is over and wanting to clear space for the following spring. But in reality, we are violently interfering with a deeply calculated slumber. The plants are not dead at all. They are entering a state of false dormancy. All the life sap, fluids, and photosynthetic energy accumulated throughout the summer are being actively drawn back by the plant. swimming down the stems deep into the earth to be hidden away in a magnificent structure. In botany, that structure is called a root crown. The asparagus root crown is a densely intertwined mass of roots clinging tightly to the dark, porous soil layer. During the coldest winter months, when the ground freezes over, the root crown rests peacefully beneath a warm blanket of mulch, silently protecting its massive energy reserve. And then, the real magic happens in spring. While the neighbor's tomato seeds are still shivering under artificial heat lamps in a greenhouse, the moment the ice melts and the soil temperature creeps up just a few degrees, this root crown immediately unleashes its power. It pushes thick asparagus spears, tinged with the pale purple of the early spring chill, piercing through the leaf mold to reach for the sun. You don't have to sow a single seed. You don't have to spread chemical fertilizers to stimulate them. The asparagus knows exactly when it is safe to rise, relying on a biological clock honed over thousands of years of evolution. However, the 20-year longevity of asparagus demands from us a sense of understanding and measured gratitude. My absolute rule is only harvest the spears that emerge during the first 6 weeks of spring. After those 6 weeks, I put the shears away. I leave the new spears alone to continue growing tall, unfurling into lush, vibrant green fern-like foliage that sways in the summer breeze, leaving the vast majority of this foliage as mandate. They act as natural solar panels, photosynthesizing and recharging the energy for the root crown underground. If you greedily cut every last spear, the root crown will be exhausted, and the plant will surrender its life by the next winter. Gardening a little slower, leaving half for nature, is exactly how we maintain a legacy for the future. Right next to the asparagus bed, the French sorrel is also an incredibly quiet messenger of spring. It fills something that old farmers used to call the harvest gap. That is the lean period between March and April, when winter food reserves run low and spring vegetables haven't had time to grow. Despite the frost still clinging to the ground, sorrel proudly pushes its young green arrowhead-shaped leaves out from the old base. Its taste is utterly unique. A slight, refreshing tartness like fresh lemon, carrying a rich dose of vitamin C that awakens every sense feeling sluggish after a long winter. To care for these two perennial vegetables, your only job is not tilling. On the contrary, let your hands and your back rest. In late autumn, I simply carry a basket of dry leaves fallen from the old maple tree, mix in some rotted wood chips, and spread a layer about 2 inches thick over the planting bed. This mulch acts like a woolen blanket, both keeping the root crown warm and slowly decomposing into humus that feeds millions of symbiotic fungi threads below. And if spring snails intend to spy on the young shoots, I absolutely do not resort to toxic chemical baits. Those little blue pellets can take the lives of birds and are a potential danger to my old dog or the neighborhood kids who like to run around the garden. Instead, I patiently scatter a ring of used coffee grounds and a bit of crushed eggshells around the base of the plant. The rough texture and slight acidity of the coffee grounds create a gentle ecological boundary, making the snails turn back automatically, without a single living creature getting hurt. Peace in the garden begins with such small, compassionate decisions. Now I'm going to pick a few of the very first sorrel leaves of the season. Listen to this. If asparagus and French sorrel are the gentle dancers awakening the topsoil in early spring, then now, as we walk deeper toward the windbreak fence of the garden, I want to introduce you to the silent miners working in the deep layers. For many gardeners, a sticky, heavy, and nutrient-poor clay soil is a nightmare. What is the usual solution from industrial agriculture? They advise you to buy noisy, gas-powered tillers, or bend your back swinging heavy pickaxes to break up the soil structure. After that, you have to open your wallet to buy dozens of bags of organic soil and expensive bottles of liquid micronutrients to compensate the surface. That is a process that erodes both your knee cartilage and your family's finances. But nature has a much more elegant way. Look at this lush green bush with triangular leaves. This is good King Henry, an ancient spinach that fed generations of Europeans before the modern seed industry pushed it into oblivion, in stark contrast to the shallow roots of common leafy greens. Good King Henry possesses a massive, rigid taproot. This root doesn't run horizontally across the surface. It drives straight down, piercing through the hard clay like a relentless biological drill. In soil science circles, we call these plants dynamic accumulators, biological mineral pumps. When the taproot penetrates into the deep soil layers that short-term vegetable roots cannot reach, they slowly exude natural organic acids. These acids dissolve the iron, calcium, and trace minerals that are locked tightly within the rock and clay. Then, the plant pumps this nutrient stream upwards, accumulating it in every cell wall of the green leaves above ground. When autumn arrives, a portion of the old leaves will fall. The microorganisms and saprophytic fungi on the surface immediately break down this leaf layer, returning all the precious trace minerals back to the topsoil. You don't spend a single dime on liquid fertilizer. You don't shed a drop of sweat. The plant feeds itself and fertilizes the plants around it. Right next to that mineral pumping system stands a natural fence almost 10 feet tall. The Jerusalem artichokes, also known as sunchokes, are standing tall, swaying their small yellow flowers under the summer sun. During hot spells and storms, the towering stems of the sunchoke create a perfect windbreak wall, sheltering the fragile lettuces or delicate greens behind it from being ravaged by the wind, while simultaneously creating a cool, shaded microclimate to retain moisture on the soil surface. However, the true value of the sunchoke lies underground. They produce massive clusters of carbohydrate-storing tubers. The continuous swelling of these tubers beneath the earth does not happen in a flash. It is a slow, patient expansion month by month. It is this gentle, yet unyielding mechanical pressure that slowly forces the clay walls to crack, creating fissures for air and rainwater to seep into. They are completely free and silent soil-loosening plows. And when autumn returns, when it's time to harvest, you will feel most clearly the reward for following nature. To grow annual potatoes, you have to bend your back to hill up the rows 3 to 4 times a season, wasting countless hours of labor. But with sunchokes, I don't need to use a rake or a shovel because the soil structure has been made so porous by the plant's own root system over the years. I only need to put on a soft leather glove, plunge my bare hand deep into the dark humus, and easily pull up clusters of crisp, plump tubers. There is no sharp hoe striking down, which means millions of earthworms, the most diligent soil workers of the garden, remain absolutely safe. After harvesting, I snap off the largest tubers to bring into the kitchen and casually leave the tiny ones buried in the soil. Next spring, from those very same tiny tubers, a new forest of sunchokes will proudly rise again. That is absolute self-sustenance. Now take a look at this fresh sunchoke I just pulled from the earth. We have spent some time admiring the massive root systems working silently in the deep layers. However, above ground, nature also has incredibly miraculous ways of operating and propagating. And if you are a gardener wanting to free yourself from the grind of sowing seeds, potting up, and anxiously waiting for sprouts every spring, then the two vegetables right in front of us will be a true salvation. Take a look at this unusually shaped clump of scallions. These are Egyptian walking onions. Growing annual onions or scallions, the industrial way usually demands an exhausting level of meticulousness. You have to buy fresh seeds, prepare seedling trays, use heat lamps to stimulate germination, and then carefully separate each fragile young root to replant it into the ground. That process consumes your time, your money, and your patience. But the Egyptian walking onion refuses to participate in that. Instead of flowering and producing dry seeds that blow away in the wind, this onion chooses an incredibly artistic path of asexual reproduction. When mature, at the very top of the onion stalk is not a flower, but a cluster of tiny, plump bulbils. They grow larger and heavier by drawing life sap from the mother plant, until one day, when the weight is great enough, the onion stalk will slowly arch downward like a dancer performing a graceful stretch. The moment the small cluster of bulbils touches the damp soil, pure white roots instantly pop out, gripping tightly into the humus. A new onion plant is born, positioned at the exact perfect distance from the mother plant so as not to compete for nutrients. A stunning natural dance of survival that requires no human hands to intervene. You only need to put them in the ground one single time. From then on, the garden will clone itself into eternity. You permanently sever the bill for buying onion seeds every year. That is a flawless, silent, inflation-proof investment. Continuing our walk to the other side of the gravel path, you will see a plant with a massive canopy, bearing a silvery blue hue that looks like a sculpture. This is sea kale. Unlike fragile lettuces that constantly demand you water them every summer evening, sea kale possesses a brilliant biological defense mechanism. The surface of their leaves is coated in a very thick natural wax called cutin. This wax layer acts like a biological mirror, reflecting the harsh rays of the sun to combat drought, while simultaneously locking the precious water tight within its cells. But what makes sea kale a true treasure doesn't just lie in its fierce vitality. It lies in a highly patient art of harvesting. If you were to pick a green leaf of sea kale under the sun and taste it, the flavor would be quite bitter and astringent. English gardeners from the 18th century passed down a very rustic technique called blanching to awaken the royal flavor of this plant. In early spring, when the sea kale shoots have just emerged from the root crown, instead of rushing to harvest, I will take a large terracotta pot. Its outside speckled with patches of damp green moss, and invert it to completely cover the young plant. You take a small stone and block the drainage hole at the bottom of the pot. Inside the pot is now a space as pitch black as ink, deprived of sunlight. The sea kale shoot cannot photosynthesize to create the chlorophyll that causes bitterness. Instead, it must stretch out, using all of its reserve energy to search for the light. After a few weeks of quiet waiting, when you tip the terracotta pot over, a beautiful sight will be revealed: elongated stems, pure white tinged with pale purple, incredibly crisp, and carrying an elegantly subtle sweetness. You use a small knife to cleanly cut that white shoot to bring to the kitchen, and leave the root crown to continue soaking up the summer sun, unfurling its massive foliage. Those massive leaves will then automatically cast a deep, cooling shadow over the ground, keeping the microorganisms cool and preventing weed seeds from germinating. Harvest a portion, return a portion to nature. That is how we create balance without effort. Now let's lift this terracotta pot together to see the first sea kale shoots. When the sunlight begins to fade, casting a honey gold hue through the canopy, I often see my old dog snoozing lazily beside this garden bed. Occasionally, the neighborhood children run over, curiously touching the giant leaves. As a gardener, my biggest worry isn't pests, but safety. There are many stunning hybrid ornamental plants that are full of toxins or covered in dangerous, sharp thorns. But all 8 of the perennial vegetables we are walking past, especially the globe artichokes and Babington's leeks in this corner, are absolutely gentle. No poisonous thorns, no caustic sap, and they absolutely do not need a single drop of chemical weed killer or toxic snail bait to survive. Your garden truly becomes a silent and safe sanctuary for all little living creatures. Look at the grandeur of this artichoke bush. In landscape architecture, it is considered a biological masterpiece. From a root crown sitting deep underground, it raises massive, silvery blue lobed leaves, shading an entire corner of the garden. The majority of people who grow artichokes only focus on taking a knife to cut the unopened flower buds to boil in the kitchen because they are a premium and expensive dish. However, my rule is to always leave at least 1 or 2 of the largest flower buds on each plant. No harvesting, no touching, just standing and watching. When summer reaches its peak, those left-behind artichoke buds will burst open into a giant crown bearing a vibrant purple hue. And at that moment, the real magic begins. This giant flower holds a massive amount of pollen and nectar, becoming the safest refueling station in the area for thousands of honeybees, bumblebees, and butterflies. They fly in, bury themselves in the soft purple stamens, eagerly drinking nectar and helping to pollinate your entire garden. You don't need to do anything. Just provide them with a place to lean on. And when the harsh winter arrives, the flowers fade away and the artichoke stalks dry up into hollow wooden tubes. Most industrial gardening manuals will urge you, grab your shears, cut them cleanly to the ground. Clean up all the debris so the garden looks perfectly tidy. I do know tidiness by human standards often equates to the destruction of nature's habitat. I let those dry artichoke stalks stand firm in the winter wind and snow, because inside those rustling, hollow tubes is where bright red ladybugs and carpenter bees curl up sound asleep, escaping the biting cold. Growing perennial plants taught me a lesson in patience. Sometimes the greatest action you can take for the ecosystem is to relinquish control and let everything quietly decompose right where it stands. Nestled right beneath the artichoke canopy are clumps of Babington's leek. Many people get frustrated because aphids constantly attack the allium family. But within the moist, year-round green folds of these perennial leek leaves is the home of tiny predatory jumping spiders. They are the most diligent guards, silently eliminating aphids every night to protect the vegetable bed, without you ever needing to mix a pungent spray bottle. And most importantly, when I need a little leek flavor for a winter soup, I only bring out a small pair of shears. I gently cut the leaves and shoots above ground, leaving the root crown completely intact in the porous earth below. A sharp iron tiller blade has never been allowed to touch this soil. And thanks to that, millions of plump earthworms are still peacefully weaving layers of moist humus right beneath the heel of my boot. We harvest, but we do not plunder. Now close your eyes for a moment and listen to the sound of life relying on this artichoke bush. The afternoon sun has started to fade, casting a honey gold color over the artichoke leaves. Standing here amidst a patch of garden that can operate itself and silently regenerate year after year, I feel a quiet sense of freedom. This serenity does not come from using our strength to conquer or force nature, but from learning how to humbly step back, letting nature do its magnificent work. Planting a bed of annual lettuce brings short-term joy, but putting an asparagus root crown or a cluster of Egyptian walking onions into the earth means you are beginning to build a legacy. An effortless legacy that is joint-friendly and completely immune to the inflationary spirals of the market. 15, 20 years from now, these underground root masses will still be here, resiliently pushing up shoots every spring to nourish your family, even when you no longer wish to swing a hoe. The wisdom of these eternal vegetables was once a treasure of the generations before us. Therefore, before I pick up my harvest basket and head back to the porch, I truly want to hear your story. Is there a perennial vegetable that once proudly grew in your grandparents' old garden that you never see anymore today? Tell me about it in the comments below, so those rustic memories are not buried by this rushed industrial age. Now, you hold in your hands vegetables that will live on their own for decades. But when the dry summer months hit, how do we avoid the exhausting task of dragging a watering hose all over the garden every afternoon? In next week's video, we will explore 7 vegetables you can grow without constantly watering. I'll see my fellow garden lovers there.